I found out about her betrayal while lying in my own bed, in the house we had built together over 20 years, under the roof where we hid gifts for our children and dried mint in the attic. The noise came through the ventilation system. Not words, but intonations. Someone else's trust. Someone else's laughter. Do you know what betrayal sounds like? It's like someone gently moving furniture around in your shower, confident that they have the keys. My name is Dan. I'm 46 years old and live in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. I say this as if I'm recording an introduction to a radio show, because saying it out loud is the only way not to go crazy. This story is not about how cleverly I exposed my wife. No movie-like tricks. This is a story about simple, noticeable little things that we ignore because we are tired, because we have to take our son to practice, because the refrigerator broke down, and we have to make it to Home Depot before 8. And most importantly, because it's scary to believe the obvious. Sarah and I had been together for 19 years. We met at a charity run. I was a poor runner, but I carried the company banner. She was a good runner and carried with her a feeling of warmth. We were doing fine. A mortgage, 2 kids, a dog named Marshmallow, taxes in April, football on Saturdays, turkey on Thanksgiving, scheduled arguments, and truces without papers, like everyone else. Someday we were going to go to Utah to see the canyons, but for now, we went to Costco. Our house wasn't just a house. I hammered nails into the railing, trimmed the lilacs by the porch, changed the burnt-out light bulbs in the hallway, knew where every hex key was. Sarah loved the kitchen. We had a white quartz countertop and copper handles, which always look warmer in photos on Pinterest than they do in real life. We had a guest room downstairs with a separate entrance and shower. It seemed practical at the time. If one of your colleagues comes to a conference, we can put them downstairs. It's convenient, Sarah said. We both laughed. Who would come to visit us? Tom was the first to arrive. I knew him from college, a man who was always finding part-time jobs, losing them, and finding them again. At 45, he knew how to strike up a conversation with anyone, but he didn't know how to keep a job. Just for a month, he asked in the spring, until I decide what to do next. Sarah was in favor. We threw out the old sofa downstairs, hung thick curtains, and bought a pillow from IKEA. I don't like guests staying longer than 3 days, but Tom promised to pay, and we could use the money. Our eldest had enrolled in college, our youngest had broken his laptop screen, and we had received a bill for replacing the garage roof. At first, everything was cheerful and simple. Tom left early, came back late, and brought donuts. Sarah joked that we finally had a home barista because Tom managed to make coffee even from the cheapest beans. He was helpful. He fixed our squeaky door, repaired the wiring on the porch, and helped move a wardrobe. And importantly, for the first time in many years, our house was constantly filled with laughter. My house became like a sitcom house, where someone always drops in for a minute. When you live with people in the same house, you learn to hear their habits. How Sarah closes the dishwasher door with her hip. How I cough before I say something. How Tom leaves his keys on the hook, but always misses the hook on the left. And when a new note is added to the familiar chorus, a very quiet one, you notice. The first thing that struck me wasn't laughter. It was silence. More precisely, silence where the truth always resounded. Sarah began to quietly turn on music in the kitchen when I went upstairs to the children. She used to love the sound of the dishwasher running because it was white noise, like the sea. Now it was music. She also stopped slamming doors, and she started wearing her hair down more often at home. I didn't take it as a sign. People change, for God's sake. I was working more. There were layoffs in the department. I was kept on, but forced to take on 2 projects at once. Fatigue is the best glue for illusions. The second thing was logistics. We always did it this way. 1 glass of wine in the evening at Sarah's, sometimes 2 on weekends, beer at my place. We rarely opened wine on weekdays, and suddenly, empty bottles began to appear in the recycling more often. "We have to throw them away all at once," Sarah said and laughed. "Otherwise, the neighbors will think we're drinking ourselves to death." I shrugged and even took a photo for fun, like another record. The third thing is technology. I love gears, both real and digital. At Christmas, I installed a smart thermostat, and notifications came to my phone. And then in mid-May, at 11:40 p.m. The temperature downstairs changed by a couple of degrees on its own. "A warm shower," Sarah explained. "Tom likes it hot." She said it too quickly. Too quickly. And I let that thought slip away from me, like a trolley bus you don't want to catch. I'm not jealous. I never have been. Truly jealous people keep track of who, where, and when. I keep other accounts. Credit cards, interest rates, days until insurance payments. But there are things you can't blame on tired nerves. That night, I started with didn't change the facts. It changed me. The kids were at my parents' house. My mom took them to Lake Erie for the weekend. The house was quiet, rain tapping on the porch canopy. I was lying down, going over my shopping list in my head. And suddenly, I heard a sound in the ventilation, like a whisper, like shh, like breathing. And a second sound, a response. I closed my eyes tighter, as if that would make it go away. Then I heard quiet laughter. Was it Sarah? I don't know what I was hoping for. That it was a TV show on the phone? That Tom was talking to his sister? Anything but what it was. I went down the stairs barefoot. Our steps always creaked on the 5th and 8th, and I stepped over them like a dancer. The guest room was closed. That's normal. The guest is alive. Why would he open it? Light was coming through the crack under the door. I stood there thinking like an idiot. Should I knock? Why? And then I heard Sarah's voice. "You didn't turn it up," she said. "He's upstairs." I left. I didn't knock. I went back to the bedroom where my shopping list was lying on the nightstand. Coffee, batteries, trash bags. And there too lay the memory. How we chose the color of the walls. How the children played hide and seek downstairs. How Sarah said she loved the smell of fresh bread. And I got up early on Sundays to bake it. And now, in this same house, in my own quiet, my wife is asking someone to speak more quietly. It was impossible in the morning. Sarah moved around the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Tom came upstairs with some cheerful joke. I couldn't hear the words. I could hear my pulse in my temples. And I said to myself, "You don't know anything. You didn't see it. Don't accuse without proof." Male pride is a strange thing. It's easier to bite your tongue than to admit your fear. I started collecting little things, like coins in a glass jar. A thin thread on the door handle, which I tied at the bottom so that when opened, it would fall onto the carpet. Once it was lying there. The smell on the towels, a different air conditioner, a new playlist on Sarah's phone, which suddenly had a lot of slow songs on it. She never liked them. Tom stopped leaving his keys on the hook. He carried them with him. "I lost them once. Now I don't take any chances," he explained with a smile. "I live in a country where evidence is currency. Any family history turns into accounting. Who invested how much? Who excluded what? Who is entitled to what? But betrayal has no check and no stamp. It's like a wet mark on a tabletop. Visible, but impossible to prove. I tried to do what is rarely done in marriage. Talk. "Sarah, we need to talk about us," I began on Saturday when we were alone. "Us?" She pushed her hair back. "Of course, what about? Are you happy? Right now?" She thought for a moment. "No, I'm tired. You're always at work, and at home you're on your phone. We live side by side. like neighbors. She was telling the truth. I sat there, as if in confession, and thought, that's it. Now we'll say out loud what's wrong and fix it. Tom, I began and fell silent. What about Tom? Her voice was calm. He's downstairs. And I couldn't. The words stuck like a bone. I came up with a path of noble patience. First I'll find out for sure, then I'll talk. It's funny, as if the heart is a court where you have to gather evidence. A week later, I forgot my phone on the kitchen island with the voice recorder on. I hated myself for it. I was ready to throw the phone in the sink. But I left it there, like you leave a fishing rod in the water when you know for sure there are fish there. Marshmallow and I went outside, and I came back an hour later. The recording contained noise, the refrigerator, footsteps, and a quiet voice. He's outside. Sarah's voice. 5 minutes, replied the man, and a pause, and the sound of the door downstairs, the same lock that Tom was fixing. That was enough. A lot, and a little at the same time. I listened again and again, as if trying to hear other meanings, excuses, coincidences in it. You know how we justify others? We invent a voice for them, ourselves. She just went to check if the door was locked. He asked to add water to the boiler. 5 minutes, because he has to take the laundry out of the dryer. We cling to every version except the one we already know. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, for the first time in 19 years, I didn't go to Sunday breakfast. I told Sarah, I'm going to my father's to help with the boat. My father sold the boat 5 years ago. I drove to a motel on I-90, sat on the bed between 2 identical nightstands, and started looking for a lawyer. Type in Ohio divorce, and you'll see hundreds of smiling people in suits, and the same set of words. No fault. Property. Custody. They all offer free consultations. I didn't choose the brightest smile. I didn't need a tiger. I needed someone who would say, "You're not crazy." The lawyer's name was Linda. She was older than me, with a silver streak at her temple and calm eyes. I told her what I knew. I didn't show her the recording. She believed me without it. "What do you want?" she asked. "The truth," I said, and I heard how naive it sounded in her office, where everything was in its place. "You'll get the truth," Linda replied. "The question is what you'll do with it." I returned home on Monday evening. The house smelled of curry. Sarah was cooking Indian food. Tom was sitting at the table, chatting with our son about baseball. I sat down, ate, and the food tasted like salt. Then we cleared the table. The children went upstairs. Tom said, "I'm going to my room." Sarah was breathing loudly. "Stay," I said to Tom. "We need to talk." Sarah turned her head quickly, the kind of quick turn of the neck that people make when they hear something. For a second, the plate in her hands trembled. Tom froze. "About what?" he asked, as if he were still being friendly. "About what's going on right here, downstairs," I said. "And don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about." Silence, in which you could hear the clock ticking in the living room. Sarah put down the plate. Tom looked at her, and suddenly I felt like an outsider in their gaze. They were a team. "Dan," Sarah said, "let's not make a scene. This isn't a scene, it's a question. There's nothing going on between us like you're imagining." Tom raised his hands. Could you speak more quietly?" I suggested. 5 minutes? Sarah's gaze darkened. I realized I was in trouble. "It was," she began and fell silent. "It was," I repeated, "in our house." We talked for a long time and badly. Words broke halfway through. Tom spoke, then fell silent. In the end, he said he was leaving. "I'm sorry," he said, and went downstairs to pack his things. I watched Sarah hold onto the table as if it were a shore and she were surrounded by water. "Why?" I asked. "Why here? Why like this?" Because you were there and you weren't there, she replied quietly. Because I'm tired of being invisible. Because with him, I felt alive again. Because he was there, and you were somewhere in numbers and letters. That was also true. And yet it was untrue if you tried to use it as an excuse. I was never the perfect husband. I sometimes yelled, sometimes shut myself off, forgot our anniversary, once didn't come to our daughter's concert, stuck at work, and that was bad. But betrayal is not the answer to fatigue. It's a new fatigue that is placed on everyone's shoulders. Tom moved out overnight, so quickly, as if he had rehearsed it. In the morning, the downstairs smelled of emptiness, the smell of cleaned rooms. I stood at the door of the guest room, which we hadn't been in for so many years, and saw my reflection in the glass, a stranger. Sarah came in from behind. "I'm going to my sister's," she said, "for a couple of days." "Go," I replied. The children found out later. At this age, 15 and 11, they are smarter than we think and more naive than they seem. I told my daughter honestly, but without details. My son asked, "Are we staying in this house?" For the first time, I didn't know the answer. The house became like an old blanket, warm but damp through and through. Most of all, I was afraid of anger. It's justified, but useless. I was afraid of becoming the kind of man I don't like, the kind who sits in a bar in the evenings and says, "They're all the same." So I chose action. Linda and I started a paper life. Folders, forms, piles of evidence. In Ohio, no-fault divorce means no one has to prove infidelity to get divorced. It's strangely liberating. The truth no longer has to be stretched to fit a legal framework. It lives separately, and you are left alone with it. Sarah came back a week later. We sat on the porch, blue cups, warm air, a train humming in the distance. We can always hear the train in the evenings. "It's my fault," she said first, "and no buts can change that." "Thank you for saying that," I said. And it wasn't politeness, but an acknowledgement of fact. Sometimes the only thing that saves you from complete decay is to call things by their proper names. "I want to explain," she asked. "Not to justify myself, to understand myself." She told me how it all began. Not with, "He put his hand on my shoulder," or "the heat in my blood." With tea. Tom once stayed to fix the faucet and offered her tea. She replied, "Thank you. My hands are shaking." And he heard that shaking and asked how she slept, how she ate, how she lived. I didn't ask, or I asked formally, and she felt noticed, and then desired. And then everything went according to the script that millions had followed before them. She swore that she hated every minute of it afterwards, and then she needed it again. This cycle is very understandable to anyone who has ever tried to give up something sweet. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "Because to do that, I would have had to admit that everything was bad," she said. "And I was afraid that if I said it, you would say yes, and our home would be over." And it turned out that it ended anyway. We cried, adults, 40 years old, with wrinkles from the sun and from phones. And we agreed. We would neither punish nor seek revenge. We would part quietly, without drama. We would tell the children that we loved them most of all. We would sell the house if it was for the best. At that point, I didn't know if I could live within those walls. The summer dragged on with long white days. We lived side by side like strange neighbors. We slept in different rooms, cooked in the same kitchen, and planned our schedules so as not to run into each other at the coffee machine in the morning. Inside, it was empty. But emptiness is not only about grief, it is also about space. In it, you can see what you have left. I still had my children, my work, my friends, my hands that remember wood, and my ears that can hear the rain again. While the paperwork was being processed, I went down to the guest room. I took down the curtains, and daylight returned. I repainted the wall. I took the sofa out onto the sidewalk, and it was taken away in half an hour. Everything gets taken away in our neighborhood. I found a multi-tool Tom had forgotten on the shelf and threw it into the lost and found box, which I took to church. I removed everything that might smell like them. It's not a ritual of revenge, it's sanitation. Once, downstairs, I found a small item behind the washing machine, a black hair tie. Not Serena's. She always had light-colored ones. Maybe it was an old one from my daughter. Maybe. But it lay in my hand like a pebble from the shore you left and always looked back on. I threw it in the trash. I could have kept it as a symbol, as proof, as a legend, but I wanted to live without museum exhibits of someone else's mistakes. The day we signed at the notary's office, the guardian, that's what I mentally called the woman behind the glass, was quiet. We left and divided the folder in two. Sarah went to her car. I walked to mine and suddenly realized I had done everything right, but it didn't make me feel any better. Relief is a product of long storage. You have to put it in the refrigerator and wait. We sold the house in the fall. A young couple came, with a dog smaller than ours. They happily ran their hands over the tabletop and exclaimed in the guest room, "Oh, a separate entrance." I smiled so much that I probably looked like a friendly manager. We packed up the boxes and went our separate ways. On the day the movers took away the last chest of drawers, I walked through the empty rooms. Each of them had a story. Here, my son broke a vase with a ball. Here, my daughter baked cookies for the first time. Here, we argued about breakfast in bed. She thought it was clingy. I thought it was romantic. Downstairs was empty, and for the first time, the walls didn't whisper. I rented a small 2-room apartment in an area where I didn't have to explain to my neighbors why I was alone. It was easier there. In the evenings, I learned to cook for one. It's a different kind of arithmetic. I stopped buying in bulk. It's ridiculous after Costco, where everything seems like a promising investment in the future. But for one is a more profitable rule. Take what you can eat. I started running again, like on that day of the race, only now without a banner. The children came to me on weekends and weekdays, as agreed. For the first time in our lives, we spoke honestly, not because we decided to, but because it just happened that way. I learned to say, "I don't know," when I don't know. It's strangely liberating. Sarah wrote sometimes, short messages, sometimes long ones, about dreams in which she was living in our house again, and everything was fine. And downstairs, empty. Sometimes, about going to therapy. I replied when I could. And once, 6 months later, we met in a cafe. I was able to look at her without a burning desire to bring back the past or destroy it. She said, "I read that forgiveness is not agreement. It is an acknowledgement of what was, and that what comes next will be different. Were you able to forgive?" "I was able to accept it," I replied. And that, it seems, is the main thing. Tom wrote me a strangely polite letter once. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to make it up to you. I was weak." I didn't reply. It wasn't out of malice. It's just that there's no room in my life now for someone else's remorse. My own is enough. Are you waiting for me to say that I met someone new? It would be a beautiful scene. Me in a bookstore, her dropping her notebook, me picking it up, us laughing, then baking bread together and never cheating. Life isn't so kind to screenwriters. I met someone a little over a year ago. Her name is May. She's one of those people who knows how to be silent in a way that makes the silence cozy, not scary. We're taking our time. Sometimes in the evenings, I think about home. Not about how bad it was at the end, but about how good it was. I don't want betrayal to have a monopoly on memory. Home is years, not one night. Home is a cake that didn't turn out right, and a skirt that didn't dry in time, and a light bulb you screwed in the wrong way. Home is, look, a bird on the kitchen window. Home didn't die that night. It died when we stopped talking and listening. The night was a symptom, not a diagnosis. If you're listening to me and thinking, what if this is about me? Try a simple test. No phones, no notes. See if you can say out loud what you're afraid of. Can you ask, are you with me? Can you handle the answer? Sometimes it's not a lock that saves a house, but a question. Once, already in my new apartment, I woke up to the same sound. The ventilation was vibrating slightly, and it was raining heavily outside, and I was hit by a familiar wave. What if? I got up, walked into the hallway, and stopped. Silence. No one there. I laughed, and I realized that it's not just important to leave the house where you were betrayed. It's important to get out of the scenario where every breath is a threat. In winter, my children and I went to my parents' house for the holidays. Mom baked an apple pie, as always with too much sugar. Dad told the same story about fishing, as if it had happened yesterday. I caught myself feeling good, where nothing remarkable was happening. That's what health is, when ordinary things heal you again. In the spring, I saw Sarah in the supermarket parking lot. She was carrying a plastic bag of greens, holding it close to her like a child. She saw me and smiled. We stood there like people who used to share a house, a refrigerator, a bed, but now each had their own world. "How are you?" I asked. "Learning to live," she said. Me too. I don't know how to tell the epilogue. People want to hear that each of us got what we deserved. Me, a reward. Her, punishment. But life is a blank sheet without dotted lines. I don't like the word victim. I am a person who has been hurt, and I'm alive. And that's enough of an identity. What did I learn? A few simple things. First, home is not a place where nothing ever happens. Home is a place where everything happens, and therefore, there should be more honesty than pathos there. Second, over the years, we become experts at avoidance. We avoid conversations because they can destroy what is fragile. But avoidance is also a conversation, only in the language of signs. Someone is bound to understand it in their own way. Third, betrayal does not erase the good, but it does not make the bad more noble either. It just is. And you can live with that is. 2 years after the divorce, I was back at the race. Same route, different season. On the home stretch, I saw my daughter waving her arms and shouting, "Dad!" My side stung, but I sped up anyway. There was nothing remarkable on the scoreboard. Average time, usual medal. But inside, I knew that what we run for is not a record. It's the opportunity to run to where you are expected. Sometimes I think about that night and the phrase 5 minutes. It's funny, but over time, it stopped hurting me. 5 minutes seems to be just enough time to breathe through any panic. 5 minutes is a small bridge between then and now. When things get tough, I tell myself, 5 minutes. Breathe. Friends, acquaintances, and acquaintances of acquaintances often write to me, "How did you survive?" But I didn't survive. I continue to live. And if anyone needs my advice, it's simple. You don't have to become a better person because of someone else's meanness. You simply have the right not to break down. And you also have the right to a home where you can hear laughter. Yours, your children's, your friends'. And that laughter won't echo from the ventilation. It will be yours, and the walls will recognize it. When we closed the door of our house for the last time, I turned back, leaned toward the handle and said, "Thank you." For what? For the fact that the walls, as corny as it may sound, hear everything. And if something foreign stirs in them one day, they will tell you too. Not with words, with a draft, a shadow, a tremor. You just can't brush it off. And then, open the windows. Let the air in. Accept that what you loved is now part of your history, not your future. There are no winners here. There are only people who have learned new forms of silence. And if you ever want to ask yourself, would I have heard it then? Don't torture yourself. You heard as best you could. Now you hear better. And yes, I did go to Utah after all. Not because I fulfilled an old dream, but because I wanted to see what walls that no one built look like. Canyons have stood for hundreds of thousands of years and are more honest than any human being. I stood on the edge and breathed. And for the first time in many months, I realized, inside, there is emptiness of the right size. It will hold everything that comes next. Without 5 minutes, without other people's voices, with mine. And someday, perhaps with someone else's, to whom I will say directly, listen, I'm here.